Okay, so today I want to talk about something that I think most people are not seeing clearly yet. And I mean that very literally, because when you watch the news, when you watch CNN, when you watch Fox News, when you watch the BBC, what do you see? You see a war between America and Iran, two countries, one conflict. But I want to show you today that this framing is completely wrong, because what Iran just did, and I want to be very specific about this, is not just fighting a war. What Iran just did is spring a trap. And this trap does not just catch America. This trap pulls China into a direct confrontation with America. And once you understand how this trap works, once you see the structure of it, you will understand why I believe we are now closer to a world war than at any point since 1945. Okay, so let's begin. And as always, I want to start with a thought experiment because I think thought experiments are the best way to understand complicated things. Okay? So imagine you are playing chess, okay? And your opponent is much stronger than you. He has more pieces, he has more experience, he has more resources. If you play a normal game of chess, if you try to fight him piece by piece, you will lose. There is no question about that. So what do? You do not fight him directly. Instead, you create a situation, a position on the board where no matter what move he makes, he loses something important. You trap him. In chess, we call this a fork. One move attacks two pieces at the same time. Your opponent can only save one. The other one is gone. This is exactly what Iran has done to America. And the second piece, the one America cannot save, is China. Now, let me explain this carefully because this is the core of my entire analysis today. Okay? So first, let me give you some background because to understand what is happening now, you need to understand the relationship between China and Iran. And this relationship is much deeper than most people realize. In 2021, China and Iran signed a 25-year cooperation agreement. Okay, this is a very important agreement. Under this agreement, China committed to investing $400 billion into Iran's infrastructure, roads, railways, ports, energy facilities. In exchange, Iran agreed to supply China with heavily discounted oil for 25 years. Okay? So China gets cheap oil. Iran gets investment and economic survival. It is a deal that benefits both sides enormously. Now, here is the key number I want you to remember. China currently imports approximately 5.4 million barrels of oil per day through the Strait of Hormuz. Let me say that again. 5.4 million barrels per day through the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran now effectively controls. Think about what this means. China's entire industrial economy, its factories, its supply chains, its manufacturing base, which produces goods for the entire world, runs on oil. And the majority of that oil comes through a strait that Iran controls. This is not a minor detail. This is a strategic dependency of the most profound importance. Okay? So now let me ask you a question, and I want you to think about this very carefully. If you are China, if you are sitting in Beijing watching this war, what is your primary concern? Some people say, well, China is happy. Iran is fighting America. China's enemy is being weakened. Okay, that is one way to look at it. And on the surface, yes, there are some benefits for China. America is being drained militarily. America is being weakened economically. America's credibility in the world is collapsing in real time. But here is the problem. Here is the fork in the chess game. China's oil supply is being disrupted. China pre-purchased oil in the first 2 months of 2026. China's oil imports surged 16% as it tried to build stockpiles. Okay, so China was smart. China saw this coming. But no stockpile lasts forever. And every single day that the Strait of Hormuz remains partially closed, China's economic pressure increases. Oil prices are rising, and for every 25% increase in oil prices, China's economy shrinks by approximately 0.5% of GDP. Okay, that does not sound like much, but for an economy already facing pressure, already dealing with domestic challenges, this matters a great deal. So China is being hurt. Not as much as America, not as much as Europe, but China is being hurt. And here is where the trap closes, because China now faces a choice. And either option of this choice pulls China deeper into this conflict. Option 1, China does nothing. China watches Iran fight America alone. But if Iran is defeated, if America destroys the Iranian government and installs a friendly regime, then what? then China loses its most important oil partner. It loses its $400 billion investment. It loses the 25-year agreement. It loses discounted oil. It loses the Belt and Road corridor through Iran. Everything China has built in the Middle East over the last decade, gone. If Iran falls, China's entire Middle East strategy collapses. Option 2, China helps Iran. China provides weapons. China provides technology. China provides economic support to keep Iran fighting. And we are already seeing signs of this. Chinese companies have been providing missile components to Iran. Chinese satellite technology has been used to target American forces. Chinese radar systems, navigation technology, dual-use equipment, all flowing to Iran. The Americans have already accused China of providing chip-making tools to Iran's military. They seized an Iranian ship carrying Chinese dual-use equipment. So here is the fork. If China does nothing, it loses Iran and everything that comes with it. If China helps Iran, it risks direct confrontation with America. Either way, either path, China is being pulled deeper into this conflict. This is the trap Iran set, and America, by attacking Iran, triggered it. Now, let me go even deeper because I want to explain why this trap is so dangerous. And to do that, I want to go back to a concept I have discussed many times before, the concept of escalation dominance versus escalation control. Okay, so escalation dominance is the American approach. It means I have so much firepower, so much military strength that I can always escalate higher than you. If you hit me, I hit you harder. If you hit me harder, I hit you even harder. The idea is that at some point the other side looks up the escalation ladder, sees how high I can go, and decides to stop. That is escalation dominance. Escalation control is the Iranian and the Chinese approach. It means I do not need to match you at every level. Instead, I control when and how escalation happens. I choose my moments. I choose my responses. I keep you guessing. I keep you off balance. And crucially, I make sure that every escalation by you costs you more than it cost me. Now, here is the critical question. In a conflict between China and America, which approach wins? And the answer is very clear when you understand the geography. If America and China go to war, where does that war happen? It happens in the Pacific, in China's neighborhood. China has the home advantage. China does not need to project power across 10,000 miles of ocean. China is already there. And this is something the American military fully understands and is terrified by. The Americans spent enormous resources studying the Iran war, watching how their weapons perform against Iranian drones and missiles. They are learning. But here's what is very interesting. China is also watching. China has been studying every American weapon system, every American tactic, every American vulnerability up close, in real time, in a live combat environment. The Americans are fighting against weapons that China helped design. So China now knows exactly how American systems perform, and America still does not fully know what China has. Okay, now I want to bring in a concept that I think is very important to understand, and this is the concept of what I call the strategic vacuum. Here is the situation. During the Cold War, America was very careful about where it fought wars. Why? Because if America attacked a country that was closely allied with the Soviet Union, the Soviets would respond. So America always had to ask before every military action, what will the Soviets do? This kept America somewhat disciplined, somewhat rational. But the Soviet Union collapsed, and after 1991, there was no more constraint. America could attack Iraq, no consequence. America could attack Yugoslavia, no consequence. America could attack Libya, no consequence. America could attack Afghanistan, no consequence. Because there was no superpower standing behind these countries saying, if you attack them, you attack us. And this is exactly the situation that lured America into attacking Iran. There was no Chinese military presence in Iran. There were no Chinese soldiers on Iranian soil. So America thought, okay, we can hit Iran. China will complain diplomatically. China will call for a ceasefire, but China will not fight. And on the surface, this seems correct. China has not sent troops. China has not declared war. China is officially neutral. But here is what is actually happening underneath the surface. And this is the most important thing I will say today. China is fighting this war, just not the way America expects. China provided the satellite that Iran used to monitor American military positions for strikes. Chinese radar systems enhanced Iran's electronic warfare capabilities. Chinese missile components flow through third countries into Iran's stockpile. Chinese geospatial intelligence companies tracked American forces and sold that data to Iranian proxies. Chinese Beidou navigation technology, China's version of GPS, is being used by Iran to direct missile attacks across the region. This is not neutrality. This is warfare by proxy, warfare by supply chain, warfare by technology transfer. And it is working. It is working because America cannot directly punish China for it without opening a second and potentially much more catastrophic front in the Pacific. This is the trap. Iran drew America into a war. China is helping Iran fight that war through indirect means. And America cannot stop China without risking a direct confrontation, a world war in the Pacific. Okay, now let me talk about what happens next because I want to give you my game theory analysis of where this goes. I have been saying since 2024 that America will lose the war in Iran, not because Iran is militarily stronger, but because America cannot sustain a war of attrition against a determined, civilizationally unified enemy with a 20-year plan while simultaneously managing a global economic disruption and a domestic political crisis. And now with China in the picture, even indirectly, the situation becomes even more impossible for America. Here is why America right now is stretched across multiple fronts simultaneously. It is bombing Iran. It is managing Yemen's entry into the war. It is watching Iraq's resistance forces strike American bases. It is trying to keep the global economy from collapsing as oil prices rise. It is dealing with domestic political opposition. Only 40% of Americans support this war. And now it has to manage a confrontation with China, the world's second largest economy, without triggering a full Pacific war. Each of these problems individually is manageable together. They create what I call a strategic overextension, a situation where the empire is being pulled in too many directions at once and cannot focus its resources effectively on any single problem. And strategic overextension is how empires fall, not from a single decisive defeat, but from being pulled apart slowly from multiple directions simultaneously. Let me give you a historical parallel because I always come back to history. Think about the British Empire at the end of World War II. Britain won the war. Britain was on the winning side. But the cost of fighting that war, the financial drain, the military overextension, the political exhaustion was so enormous that within 20 years the British Empire had collapsed. India independent, Africa decolonized, the Middle East gone. The empire that won the war lost everything else in the process. America today is in a similar position. It may win individual battles in Iran. It may destroy Iranian military infrastructure. It may even temporarily reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But the cost of doing all this in money, in interceptor missiles, in political capital, in global credibility, is draining the foundations of American power. And China, sitting patiently in Beijing, is watching all of this with great satisfaction. Because every dollar America spends in Iran is a dollar it cannot spend on the Pacific. Every interceptor missile used against Iranian drones is one less missile available to deter China in Taiwan. Every American general focused on Iran is a general not focused on the South China Sea. This is what strategists call the cost imposition strategy. You do not need to defeat your enemy directly. You just need to force your enemy to spend resources in the wrong place at the wrong time. Iran is imposing costs on America in the Middle East. China is the beneficiary in the Pacific. Okay, now I want to address the big question directly. Is this World War III? And I want to be very careful about this because I do not want to be sensational. I do not want to just say scary things to get views, okay? I want to think about this seriously. So let me define what I mean by World War II because I do not mean necessarily a war where China and America directly exchange missiles or soldiers. That may or may not happen. What I mean by World War II is a structural confrontation between the two great powers, America and China, that reshapes the entire global order. A confrontation that draws in multiple countries, multiple theaters, multiple economic systems. A confrontation that, when it is over, leaves the world fundamentally different from how it was before this definition. Yes, I believe we are in the early stages of World War II right now. Here is my reasoning. The war in Iran is not really about Iran. Iran is the battlefield. The real conflict is between two visions of how the world should be organized. On one side, the American vision, dollar dominance, Western financial institutions, American military bases controlling the choke points of global trade, petrodollar recycling keeping the American economy afloat. On the other side, the Chinese vision, a multipolar world, the Belt and Road, the North-South trade corridors, the UAN replacing the dollar for oil transactions, Chinese infrastructure connecting Eurasia to Africa to the Indian Ocean. These two visions cannot coexist. One must win. And the Iran war is the first major direct collision between these two visions. And here's what makes it World War II specifically. Because of the positions of the other major powers, Russia is effectively on Iran's side. Russia provides energy. Russia provides diplomatic cover in the UN Security Council, where it has vetoed resolutions against Iran alongside China. Russia benefits every day that America is distracted in the Middle East and not focused on Ukraine or Eastern Europe. India is trying to stay neutral, but India is buying Iranian oil through back channels. India is part of the North-South transport corridor that connects Russia through Iran to Indian ports. India's economic interests are being affected by the disruption of Gulf trade. Europe is following America, but reluctantly, nervously, with one eye on its own energy security and economic stability. The European economy is already suffering from the oil price increases. Germany's president publicly called this war a huge blunder. Turkey is in a complicated position. Turkey is NATO, but Turkey has its own interests in the Middle East that do not always align with America's. What I am describing is not a simple two-sided war. This is a systemic reorganization of the entire global order, and that is what World War III looks like in the 21st century. Not trenches and fronts and declarations of war. It looks like economic warfare, proxy warfare, technology transfer, energy disruption, financial system fragmentation, and the slow collapse of the institutions that held the post-World War II order together. Okay, now let me come back to Iran specifically because I want to make sure you understand what Iran actually did strategically that triggered all of this. Iran understood something that America did not. Iran understood that the real war is not on the battlefield. The real war is in the global economic system, and the Strait of Hormuz is the most powerful economic weapon on the planet. Think about it. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow stretch of water about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it. 5.4 million barrels of Chinese oil per day. Europe's energy supply, Japan's industrial fuel, South Korea's manufacturing base. All of it flows through this tiny strait, and Iran controls the shores on one side. Iran has missile bases, drone factories, naval assets positioned throughout the Persian Gulf. And crucially, Iran controls this strait from deep inside its own territory, from underground bases inside mountains that America has not been able to destroy despite weeks of bombing, by threatening the Strait of Hormuz, by demonstrating that it can disrupt global oil flows. Iran did not just threaten America's war effort, Iran threatened the entire global economy. And in doing so, Iran forced every major power, China, Russia, India, Europe, to have a stake in how this war ends. This is geopolitical genius because now America cannot just fight Iran. America has to manage the reactions of every other major power simultaneously. China is supplying Iran indirectly. Russia is providing diplomatic cover. India is quietly buying discounted oil. Europe is nervous and divided. And all of these powers have different interests and different red lines. America has to satisfy all of them simultaneously while also trying to win a military campaign. It is impossible. Okay, so let me give you my final analysis, my prediction, because I know that is what you are here for. I have 3 predictions, and as always, these are not prophecy. These are structural analysis. Game theory applied to historical patterns. Prediction 1. America will eventually be forced to accept an exit from this war that looks like a negotiated settlement, but is actually a strategic retreat. Why? Because the economic and political cost of continuing this war will become unsustainable. Not in 20 years. I think within the next year or two, the interceptor missiles are running out, the political will is running out, the money is running out, and the oil price disruption is creating an economic crisis that affects American voters directly. Prediction 2. China will emerge from this war significantly stronger, not because China fought, but because China let America fight while China quietly secured its position. China will inherit Iran as an economic partner, fully embedded in the Belt and Road. China will take control of the Middle East data infrastructure, AI centers, surveillance systems, 5G networks, as Gulf states nervous about American reliability turn to China for technology. China will become the primary mediator and the dominant economic power in the Middle East without firing a single bullet in anger. Prediction 3, and this is the big one, the dollar-based global financial system, the petrodollar, will be permanently weakened by this war because the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, will look at what happened and ask themselves a question. If we rely on America for our security, and America starts a war that puts our water supplies, our oil installations, and our cities at risk, is American security worth having? The answer, I believe, will increasingly be no. And as Gulf states look for alternatives, as they diversify their partnerships toward China and toward neutral powers, the foundation of dollar dominance begins to erode. This is the long-term consequence of what Iran just did. Iran did not just fight a war. Iran triggered a reorganization of the entire global order. Iran forced the confrontation between American hegemony and Chinese ambition that was always coming, but perhaps would have waited another decade. Iran pulled that confrontation forward into the present. And America, by attacking Iran without a plan, without political will, without manufacturing capacity to sustain the campaign, without allies willing to fight, walked straight into the trap. The fork in the chess game is closed. America cannot save both pieces. It cannot maintain its position in the Middle East and simultaneously contain China in the Pacific. It does not have the resources, the political will, or the strategic clarity to do both. And so, as I have said since 2024, America will lose this war not on the battlefield necessarily, but in the wider strategic sense in the global order, in the financial system, in the balance of power between East and West that will define the 21st century. Okay, so that is my analysis for today. I want to be very clear. This is intellectual speculation. This is game theory applied to structural history. This might not happen exactly as I described. History is not perfectly predictable. But I believe the structural forces I am describing are real, and I believe they are powerful. And I believe that if you understand them, you will understand what is happening in the world much better than you would by watching cable.